Hello, check, hello.
Hello. Working?
I've told them audience Q&A is out of the scoring. तुम्हारा नाम से डर से ज़्यादा है. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Institute Foundation Day Debate 2023. My name is Anandaroop Bhattacharya, and I'm a faculty member of the Department of Mechanical Engineering at IIT Kharagpur. As the world grapples with global challenges like climate change, like global warming, environmental hazards, it has become important to come up with environmental friendly as well as sustainable solutions in order to ensure a clean world for our future generations. And one such solution that has gained a lot of prominence over the last 1 decade is that of electric vehicles, or broadly I would say electrification of the transportation system, where countries and governments around the world have focused on this solution and invested heavily. If I have to take General Motors, one of the auto majors across the world, worldwide, one of the leaders in automotive world, they want to completely get rid of gasoline-powered cars and light trucks by 2035. Volvo, they've gone a step further and said that they will have a completely electric and all-electric lineup by 2030. Back home, our own government in India, they have said that they want to have 30% of the cars on Indian roads to be electric vehicles by 2030. And to this end, they have introduced a lot of incentives to promote manufacturing and R&D in overall electric transportation. Okay. So thus, as electric cars and trucks gain prominence, a question that also arises in our mind is, okay, for all the publicity and for all the claims, is this solution truly environment friendly? Are EVs, how green are these EVs? Is the electric supply, the electric grid from where they are going to draw the power clean enough today to make that claim? What about the energy cost of manufacturing? And not to forget raw materials, especially batteries. If you think about rare earth materials or even lithium, cobalt, I mean the environmental as well as I would say human rights hazards or concerns are tremendous. So if you take all of these into account, can we really say that electric vehicles finally reduce carbon footprint? Unanimously, can we agree on that? And to be honest, personally, I feel the jury is still out. And on that topic today, we are going to debate. And we have the faculty team versus the students team who are going to discuss and debate and argue on both the merits and demerits of electric vehicles. The topic today is, in the opinion of the House, the premise that electric vehicles reduce carbon footprint is a myth. And arguing for the topic, for the premise, or for the opinion of the House is our faculty team, comprising of Professor Gargi Das of Chemical Engineering Department, Professor Atul Jain from the Mechanical Engineering Department, and Professor Uday Shankar from the Rajiv Gandhi School of Intellectual Property Law. And arguing against the motion, and as they should, is the students team And when I say as they should, is because all three of them come either from the electrical engineering department or electrical and electronics and electrical communication engineering department. So they better, argue against the motion. Okay, so my friends in the students team is Mr. Akash Neel Roy Chaudhary, Mr. Anubhav Mitra, and Mr. Harsh Singh. And last but not the least, it's my great privilege to introduce the judges for today. Professor Deepa Dubey. She is Professor and Dean of Rajiv Gandhi School of Intellectual Property Law. Professor M. Ramgopal, Professor of Mechanical Engineering and Dean of Faculty of Engineering and Architecture. And last but not the least, your very own, our students VP, Mr. Samarth Singh. Okay. Just a few words about the format of the debate. It consists of 3 rounds. Round 1 is the conventional debate round, where the participants are going to present their views within 5 minutes. And I'll give all of you a buzzer ring at 4 minutes. Of course, you can also see the timer over here. Okay. Round 2 is what we call the rebuttal round, where the teams are going to direct questions at each other. So that round is going to go for about 15 minutes, and I will talk about the details later. And round 3 would be the judges' Q&A round, where the judges will have the opportunity to ask questions to both the teams. Okay? So without further ado, I welcome all of you once again to the Institute Foundation Day Debate 2023. And we will start with the students team who are going to speak against the motion. The first speaker from the students team is Mr. Akash Neel Roy Chaudhary. Akash, you have 5 minutes. All the best.
Hello. Humanity is approaching doomsday. Now is the time to think about what needs to be done instead of what is easy to do. When our lungs fill with soot just to save our lives, when climate explodes all possibilities just to evict us from our homes, we must take action. We today will present to you why today's current situation makes EVs not only a viable, but the needed solution to reduce our carbon footprint. In basic terms, carbon footprint is just the accumulated greenhouse gases, the sum emitted by an activity or an entity. It includes not only the direct emissions, but also the indirect emissions. The metric to just this debate is purely the carbon emissions of any, the impact on carbon emissions of any argument, right? Our burden today is to prove to you that the use and popularization of EVs will lead to, in the near future, actively reducing carbon footprint. Why? Say there's a 10-year-old in a college classroom solving differential equations. You wouldn't compare them to a college student, right? You would say they have so much potential, and with the correct guidance, they could do so much more. Similarly, I believe it is very unfair to judge EVs, which has been an industry that became popular only a few decades ago, with an industry that has been popular since the dawn of the industrial age. We believe that we need to see what EVs are doing to the future of carbon footprint. Let us talk about how every innovation, no matter how novel, towards a start, needs some kind of investment, needs some kind of research, and has some kind of downside, and those need to be overcome for them to change the world, right? When we talk about ICE, internal combustion engines, today, all day, every day, they spread fumes in residential areas. This technology has existed and has been prevalent for more than a century, but every time an engine revs up, you hear the guttural groan, beckoning the time that will come where your lungs cannot keep up with the poison in the air. Oil is drying up. Every time you need to dig deeper, it gets more and more cumbersome. We cannot keep this up. Something needs to change. We cannot sit here twiddling our thumbs for 2 more decades when our children come and they cannot go out to play because the sun is too bright on their skin or the air is too toxic because we did not take action. Today we would not tolerate that world, and therefore we need to take every possible action today. Now, in this situation, our solution is the budding industry that is EV, an industry that has come up in the recent decades and is at least on par with ICE vehicles that have been here for centuries, right? We say that this is the innovation that is needed today, and this is the savior of tomorrow. EVs have the capacity for in today to grow into something much larger because of certain conditions, right? Firstly, society is more and more inching towards sustainable development. There are conventions being held like the Earth Summit, like COP27, which try to inch away from non-renewable, unclean resources towards cleaner resources. People are becoming more and more aware about what they're consuming. Society wants to be more aware. Therefore, countries have a higher incentive to promote EVs. Countries want to promote EVs. Therefore, corporates see this as a opportunity to invest more. Therefore, EVs get cheaper and we get newer, cleaner technology. Side proposition may bring to you that there are technical disadvantages of EVs. I tell you that in 1909, there were New York Times make a bold prediction, right, that man would take 1 million years to fly. In October, they made that prediction. In December, Wright brothers took the first flight. This is not the time to play safe. This is not the time to be comfortable. We must make changes. When the world is in our hands, when we need to save the world, we cannot afford to believe that EVs reducing climate change is a myth. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Akash. Yeah, a very emotional plea and trying to promote electric vehicles and give them the chance because they're quite new. Okay, so coming next is the first speaker from the faculty team, Professor Gargi Das. Yes.
Well, while I was hearing to Akash's speech, I was trying to understand the basis, or I realized the basis of the premise. The basis is seeing is believing. What do we see? Zero tailpipe emissions, no emissions during charging. But what does carbon footprint exactly mean? That also Akash had mentioned. It is the amount of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions associated with all activities pertaining to a product, a company, or a country. And for a product, a correct estimate of carbon footprint calls for a life cycle analysis of the product. So for an EV, we need to consider the carbon dioxide emissions not only during use, but also during production and recycling. The most important component is lithium-ion batteries. Lithium is produced either from brine or from hard rock spodumene, and in both cases, production is powered by burning fossil fuels. Given the global nature of the industry, environmental emissions of international transport of lithium, nickel, cobalt, from where they are mined to refined to assembled into battery packs, and finally where they are installed in a vehicle, are to be added. These costs have escalated immensely over the past few years due to the exponential increase in demand of raw materials. Just to give a data, the mine production of lithium worldwide in metric ton was 28,000 in 2010, 1 lakh in 2021, 1,30,000 in 2022. Now for production, a temperature around 800 to 1000 degrees centigrade is needed, and this again can be cost effectively reached by burning fossil fuels. Both coal and natural gas can be used, and coal emits twice the amount of greenhouse gas. At present, about 77% of world supply are manufactured in China, where coal is the primary energy source. Considering Tesla Model 3 with a 80 kilowatt hour battery, carbon dioxide emissions for manufacturing would range between 2.5 to 16 metric tons, almost equal to the emissions of a petrol car in driving 2,500 miles. Even with no direct tailpipe emissions, EVs still have a carbon footprint because of the electricity they consume. To meet this additional electricity, the existing supply has to be augmented, and as we know, capacity regulation is much easier and controllable for fossil fuel-based power stations. Also presently, if you consider just West Bengal, there are 478 charging stations and 2,350 petrol pumps. So the extra miles detour to the nearest charging station should also be considered. Further, EV with a larger battery pack is preferred for greater range on each charge, and a 50% larger battery pack increases life cycle carbon emissions by 18%. Charging during day entails a smaller carbon footprint, but definitely logistically we would be charging at night. Now coming to the least understood aspect, recycling electric vehicles and their battery components. Current life cycle analysis do not include the end-of-life emissions. Reclaiming a battery's raw materials is expected to eventually reduce the carbon footprint, and this is done by pyrometallurgy in high temperature furnaces, again using fossil fuels, and liberates toxic gases as byproducts. Further, before reuse, recycle or recovery, the battery has to be stored, tested, discharged and dismantled. Suppose we consider the year 2017, there were 1 million EV sales in 1 year. Now making a conservative assumption, when these vehicles reach the end of their lives, the resultant pack waste would be around 250,000 tons and 500,000 cubic meters of unprocessed waste. We are aware that a fire in stockpile tires in Wales smoldered for 15 years, and the electrode material in LIBs are far more reactive than tire rubber. Already we are hearing about the number of fires being reported in metal recovery facilities. So to conclude, a proper life cycle analysis shows that electric vehicles do increase carbon footprint. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Das. It's very rich in data and facts and figures, and I hope the next speaker will be able to argue against those. The next speaker from the student team is Mr. Anubhav Mitra. Anubhav, your time starts now.
Could you please restart the timer? Fine. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. We don't inherit the world from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Currently, as has already been established by my first speaker, the way we use internal combustion engines is simply unsustainable due to a variety of factors that he has already analyzed. We say that EVs, though they may have temporary setbacks, provide a more permanent solution and one that is desperately needed in the face of the impending energy crisis that we face. Firstly, let's talk about the pre-utilization phase of these cars themselves. Firstly, procurement of raw materials. Note that internal combustion engines require petroleum to run. Petroleum is a non-renewable resource, which means that it is easily exhaustible. We have already been using it for a very long time, which means that the levels of oil underneath the ground are far lower than they have ever been before. What does this mean? We need to drill deeper and construct more pipelines than ever before in order to extract this oil. This means that this process is more expensive, it is more arduous in terms of technology, but it also creates pollution indirectly, which leads to a greater carbon footprint since the process of drilling in itself is polluting. Right. On the contrary, with EVs, we can simply use lithium reserves. Jammu and Kashmir just found 5.9 million tons of lithium. Such instances are occurring all around the globe where we are finding more and more lithium. It is simply a far easier process, and it is far less polluting in terms of the process that we have to go through in terms of the procurement of raw materials itself. It makes no sense to rely on a resource that is fast exhausting. Secondly, transportation. Note that it is difficult to transport petroleum. We need to construct and maintain pipelines, which in itself require more drilling, which creates more pollution. EVs are simpler because we can easily transmit electricity without much pollution. Thirdly, storage. This was something that was brought up, that it is difficult to store lithium batteries. Note that it's more difficult to store cars in the pre-utilization phase in ICEs as well, due to problems such as fuel residues, corrosion, fuel draining, and so on and so forth. Let's come to the utilization phase. Firstly, nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds are some of the worst pollutants that we have in circulation today, and these are majorly released by ICEs, right? Whereas on the other hand, as mentioned earlier, EVs have zero tailpipe emissions. This means that we do away with some of the worst pollutants on the planet today. Secondly, greenhouse emissions, which is the most direct way that we contribute to carbon footprints. Right, greenhouse emissions are far, far less for EVs during their utilization phase because they are a far cleaner source of energy. They do not require us to convert energy with a very low efficiency rate. EVs are far more efficient than ICEs have ever been in history. Thirdly, let's talk about mileage. Note that in nations such as India, where traffic is very congested, we have quick start and stop traffic. This means that a mileage for ICEs is far lower and they underperform. A lower mileage means you burn more fuel. Burning more fuel means more pollution. This is not a problem in EVs. EVs are a very, very viable options in developing nations as well. Note that so far we have established why EVs are a better resource in the long run, simply because they will pollute less, right? But we don't just offer a tangible solution in terms of a car which pollutes the environment less. We also show you why this change is necessarily being brought up by the world all over. We will give you empirical evidence and then show you with analysis how this is necessarily going to happen. Because in the absence of EVs, what we'll essentially do is doom our future generations to live in a world that does not have viable energy sources, and we have no right to do so, as has been discussed by my first speaker. Let's talk about the instances where this has been recognized. There is currently a new wave of global awareness. Norway has restricted taxation on electric vehicles. China has introduced subsidies on the production of electric vehicles. Netherlands and France have said that they will entirely ban ICEs by 2030 and 2040. The United Nations Climate Change Conference, the 2018 Global Climate Action Summit, the Conference of Parties have all discussed this issue extensively. Countries all around the world are recognizing that electric vehicles are the need of the hour. How does this impact society? How does this affect us as regular people? Note that electric vehicles are a growing market both in terms of technology as well in terms of commercialism, right? This is not a technological change, is not going to occur overnight. What is the significance of this? Note that as we have greater demand for electric vehicles, this means there is more investment into the industry. This investment is both in terms of more production of cars, but also in the research and development of the process itself, which means that over time, EVs will become more and more cheap, which means that more people will be able to purchase them, which means that you also have the positive effects propagated throughout society. But additionally, note that this research and development imperatively means we also have better and more advanced methods of extraction. So all of the problems that were posed by proposition will necessarily go away as you have more research and we find out better and more eco-friendly ways in order to carry out all of these procedures. Meaning that in the long term, EVs necessarily provide a solution to the crisis that we have today, meaning that restricting ourselves to EVs and making this switch, which is already in place, is going to mean we have a world in which our children can live safely without fear for their lives. I beg to oppose.
Thank you, Anubhav. I'll move on to the faculty team now, and the next speaker from the team is Professor Atul Jain. Atul, your time starts now.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to compliment the moderator, Professor Bhattacharya, for thoughtfully wording the topic for the debate. I want to remind the opponent team the title is "The Premise That EV Reduce Carbon Footprint is a Myth." For some reason, both Akash and Anubhav misinterpreted it and have read the title to be "Compared to gasoline vehicles, EVs will reduce carbon footprint." So, such changing of the topic is convenient perhaps. It may be a mistake from your side, or maybe you yourself are admitting that you don't have enough points. We must focus on the present reality, not on future possibilities. Now, number one, as my teammate has eloquently put, electrical vehicles require some processes where you need energy, and all of them are irreversible. So by itself, electric vehicles cannot reduce carbon footprint. So if you were to go to court claiming that electric vehicles reduce carbon footprint, that would be put down almost instantly. Now let us put some nuance to the debate and consider what EVs are replacing today and whether this replacement leads to reduction of carbon footprint. Last year, there were about 10 million new EVs that hit the streets. Out of those 10 millions, all of them did not replace gasoline vehicles. A survey by Kelly Blue Book found that 26% or a quarter of EV owners actually also own one gasoline vehicles. This implies that this quarter of the new EV vehicles that hit the streets did not replace gasoline vehicles but were a replacement to electrical vehicles. Also, it has been found out that by the similar group that about 20 to 30% of EV owners would have opted for active modes of transport such as cycling or walking had EVs not been available. So instead, they bought in the hype and the brouhaha about EVs and they purchased EVs. So for them, the correct comparison is car versus cycle. An electric vehicle versus a cycle, if you compare the electric footprint, cycle beats an electric vehicle by a factor of 1:30. Now let us address the core premise. Electrical vehicles are not designed to save the environment. They are designed to sustain the automobile industry. Since 1960s, there has been a significant drop in the percentage of first-time car owners. It was 70% in 1960s in the US. It was coming down steadily, reached 40% by 2010. Now this false hype, propaganda, whatever you call it, of EV has reversed this trend, and the first time in several decades, we had a situation where first-time car ownership has increased. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is, if you want to save the environment, if you are really interested about the carbon footprint, shifting the goalposts or offering new forms of car will not help. What we need to promote is active transport, carpooling, public transport. Also, we must think that about the collateral damage that has been caused due to electrical vehicles. Okay, due to the relentless propaganda, hype, whatever you want to call it, of the electric vehicles, other forms of clean transportation, for example, hydrogen, compressed air, biomass, levitation, all of them have got sidelined. In the year 2022, the global expenditure on exploring new means of green transportation was close to $125 billion, out of which $90 billion, or almost 2/3 of the investment, was eaten up by the electrical vehicles. So electric vehicles are not replacing gasoline, but they are also obstructing the development of means of transport which are perhaps even more greener. Okay, my final point is going to be about, there is a lot of hype about we are going to produce clean energy to run the electric cars. Let me remind my opponent team that as of today, there are only 3 countries in the world which are able to meet 100% of their energy requirements through renewable sources. So now, due to the presence of electric cars, the electricity demand will increase, and other activities which we were doing using clean energy, now we are being forced to burn coal or other pollutants to meet the energy demand. So to conclude, there is not an iota of doubt, and indeed, electric vehicles actually are increasing the carbon footprint. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jain. So now over to the last speaker from the students team, and that's Mr. Harsh Singh from the EC department. Hey, timer, please reset the timer. Okay, Harsh, your time starts now.
Yeah. So I'd like to start my speech by simply clarifying the interpretation of the motion. That is it not audible?
It's audible.
Yeah. So I'd like to start my speech by simply clarifying about the interpretation of the motion that was posed as a question on the side opposition. So we believe that the motion states that the premise of that EV reduces carbon footprint is a myth, is the exact wording of the motion, which states we are talking about the concept of EV, whether it reduces or not, rather than whether it is actually reducing at this present seconds or not. So that is what we are fighting of. We as proven by my previous speaker, he did an intensive analysis on how EV is a concept which is something really necessary, and how it is going to lead to these changes. Now coming to the other question that was focused to us, that we are, as a side opposition, are focusing on whether EV versus that it is a debate about EV versus gasoline. So panel understand that it would in some way or the other go back to the same topic, because if these EVs are not being bought, they are going to be replaced by these gasoline vehicles only, and that is the major problem. That is why are we even talking about these carbon footprint and all if these problems don't exist? We today here are sitting over and having this discussion because we feel this problem. This is a problem which is existing. This carbon footprint was increasing intensively, which is something we are trying to cover. Now coming to the other point about how hydrogen and something is not being hydrogen fuels and all are not being focused. So understand panel, we are talking here about automobiles, and we have to find a realistic approach regarding the fuels and all that needs to be used. So now coming back to our constructives. So our constructives are really simple. That today we here as the side opposition are like as sir already stated, that how global warming is really causing so many changes. Unseasoned rain and all is taking place. Floods are happening in a few regions, where others are having drought and all. So it proves the fact that now it is the D-Day, and we need to take decisions in order to save mankind. And at this point, we as a side opposition have given enough analysis on why EV is something which needs to be brought out as a concept, and which needs to be implemented as intensively as possible, so that more and more gasoline cars are being replaced, and more and more research is being done in it, so that the amount of smoke that is being released from their tailpipe, regardless of the amount of extensive carbon footprint increasing in their side of the world, where where petroleum extraction would be increased, because as we all know that petroleum is a fossil fuel which is decreasing, and we need to improve the pipelines. We need to dig more. We need to work more and more. Social and cultural lifestyle will be destroyed due to that, because you need to extract more and more. You need to find more and more places. As we all know, Saudi is the one who is exporting these kind of petroleum and all, and one day or the other the petroleum is going to be removed. That is why we here stand in the support of EV as a concept which is going to improve the society. Yes, we agree that at this current state there are a few problems with the lithium battery, but understand panel, the more important thing, there are three very important reasons which have already been brought out by my previous speakers. I'd like to flesh it out. First of all, which needs to be considered is the fact that on the other paradigm, it is going to be petroleum, which is exhaustive, which is going to be a pollutant, and which is going to cause much more damage. As our first speaker from the side of proposition stated, that in order to try to people are already trying to recycle these lithium batteries, which means that there is going to be source of advancements. And in today's world also, Toyota in USA, one of the major EV producers, is doing so. They are trying to take their cars in the junkyards and trying to extract lithium and cobalt from lithium and nickel from there, and are using it for their further production, which means they are bringing back this lithium in the production cycle, which is a really good thing. Now coming to the other fact which was stated by first speaker, it is a budding industry, and it needs growth. It needs our help. It needs our help for it growing.
Thank you, Akash. And now we come to the last speaker of round one, and he's the final speaker from the faculty team, Professor Uday Shankar.
Thank you, Professor Anandrup. Thank you for very aptly giving a opening remark after the speech of the first speaker from the other side. He made an emotional plea. And this is precisely what myth is. When we try to understand the ordinary meaning of myth, it's nothing but a generally accepted belief without any substantiated fact. And that's what is the case with EV. When you look at the very policy on EV in India, you find that the government has decided to ensure that 30% of the vehicles should be electric vehicle. Interestingly, the government has not made any policy on phasing out coal. What does it mean? Does it mean that the whole agenda based on EV for reducing carbon footprint is misplaced one? And why it is misplaced one? Because the speakers from the other side, they are hammering on transition. Certainly, carbon footprint is a challenge. We need to reduce it. But that has to be done from transition to just transition. Why? Because we need to understand that in the absence of just transition, a lot of socio-economic aspect would be endangered. There are employment issues, there are livelihood issues. If we take up this kind of abrupt policy decision making, it would make a very damaging effect on human being and the mankind. Now, when you look at the lack of clarity on the issue of EV and non-committal on the part of the government to phase out coal, why it is so? It is primarily because of the wrong understanding of the reduction of carbon footprint through EV. Life cycle assessment has not been done. For pure EV cars, statistics says that what is required is 80 to 100 kilowatt, of battery, whereas hybrid car requires somewhere around 3 kilowatt to 5 kilowatt. Now, when you look at this, and generally the whole argument on use of lithium-ion batteries, they are heavy and huge amounts of energy are required to make them. And moreover, they are estimated to last only upward 10 years. So apparently, when you look at these hard facts, appears to be a very unscientific choice. It appears to be a perverse choice of hardware to lead fight against the climate crisis. Notably, there are variances in the carbon footprint based on geographical locations. For example, when you look at India, eastern and western regions, when you go for EV, for sure they're going to be larger damage because the end source is going to come from, thermal-based power plant because they are rich in that. So what precisely we are doing? We are changing the goalpost. What is the goalpost we have done? We have said, okay, let there be no fresh registration done of a vehicle which has become 15 years old. What a sad decision. Instead of that, what is required to be done on a law and policy perspective is to strengthen our pollution certificate process, what we call it as PUC. If you strengthen that, if you allow individuals to use the bought car for a longer duration, then it will address the issue of reducing carbon footprint in a much better way. So what we find is that there is a misplaced prioritization on reduction of carbon footprint in the area of mobility. In order to achieve a very lofty goal, what we are doing is that we are shooting ourselves in the foot. The problem relates to fast fashion sales culture that has been commercial template of the car industry for decades. In India, a study shows that consumers are changing their cars 4 to 5 years now. And when you look at the behavioral pattern of the consumer, you find that if you buy something costlier, then you get tempted to use it for a longer duration. EVs are costlier, and therefore, as a consumer, I'll prefer to drive for a longer duration. That's another, sad aspect of EV. Then, when you look at the policy prescription, 26 states have made a policy on EV, where they have given a lifeline of 2 to 8 years, which somewhere again indicates there is an uncertainty with regard to the claim what opposition is making. I would like to end by quoting Mr. Bean, Mr. Atkinson, that famous comedian. He says, friends with an environmental conscience often ask me as a car person whether they should buy electric car. I tend to say that if their car is an old diesel and they do a lot of city center motoring, they should consider a change. But otherwise, hold fire for now. Electric propulsion will be a real global environmental benefit one day, but the day has yet to dawn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Uday Shankar. You can see when a lawyer speaks, everybody listens. Okay, so that brings us to the end of round one. I think both the teams did a stellar job, and kudos once again, a round of applause for all the 6 speakers. So irrespective of whoever wins, etc., I think this is a technical topic and we have learned a lot from all 6 of them. It brings us to round number 2, and now you have the opportunity to shoot at the other team. This round will continue for 15 minutes, 1-5, okay? Where each team, you will take turns and ask a question to the opposing team, okay? We would like to cover as many questions as possible in these 15 minutes, and you will be judged on the quality of your question as well as the quality of your answer. Be brief, be precise, and to the point, okay? The time starts now. We will now have the faculty team ask the first question to the opposition team. The question can be directed to the overall team or to a particular speaker.
So Anubhav, this question is for you. You said that gasoline is non-renewable, and so we should use lithium cars. So my question to you is this question has 2 parts. First, in your opinion, is lithium renewable? B, in order to meet all the projected demands, do we have enough lithium in this planet Earth as of today? Known resources of lithium as of today. So these are my 2 questions for you.
So I'll answer both questions. Firstly, when you asked about whether or not lithium is renewable, understand that petroleum is non-renewable.
Please give me yes or no.
Fine. Lithium is non-renewable, but the thing is, we have been using petroleum for centuries. The levels of oil are way lower than they have ever been in history. As I have properly analyzed, we need to construct deeper pipelines than ever before. It is not cost effective, it is difficult to do, and thirdly, it is also harming the environment. Whereas lithium, we have way more of. Nuclear energy technically is non-renewable, but we consider it to be renewable because we have enough of it. Lithium is very similar in terms of having been untapped before. Secondly, about projected demand, right? So the thing is, lithium is currently being found out. As I said, J&K just found 5.9 million tons, which was not there before. We are constantly finding out more and more reserves as we speak. We will soon have enough lithium to power enough vehicles. This is just a process that is ongoing, which is why we do not have access to all the lithium in the world. But 100 years ago, we did not have access to all the petroleum in the world. Petroleum is already depleted to the point where it is concerning. Lithium is just a new resource which has untapped potential.
Next question from the students team to the faculty.
Atul sir, my question is to you as well. So, right, you talked about alternative means, about hydrogen and whatever. The thing is, these alternative means have been tapped into before. We have tried to fuel rockets with hydrogen, but it has been unsuccessful in the past. Electric vehicles are currently a growing industry, and we have seen application here. And secondly, once again, a second part as well, you talked about cycles being the comparative. Understand the comparative between the EV and an alternate source is always going to be a gasoline-fueled vehicle, right? The example that you posed about we using, like buying EVs on top of gasoline vehicles, understand that if I wanted to buy another vehicle, it would inevitably have been a gasoline vehicle. I can comfortably drive in a car from here to Bhubaneswar. I can't do that on a cycle, which is why at the end of the day, we are replacing gasoline vehicles with EV vehicles. So please.
Okay, so instead of a question, you gave me a bouquet of questions, so I'll answer one by one. The first thing about cars and cycles, okay? According to the Society of Automobile Engineers, which is the biggest policy making or policy informing body for automobile industry, according to their survey, about 50% of a four-wheeler use is for kilometers less than 5. Yeah. And in big cities, the number is even higher, okay? So 50% of car use can be replaced by a cycle, number one. Now let us look at it more locally. The distance from my house to the quarter is less than 2 kilometers, okay? And if I was to buy a car, I only run it for 2,000 kilometers a year. So if I buy an electric vehicle, buying the false hype and propaganda that you have bought, and so I will end up increasing the carbon footprint. So your premise that electric vehicles will replace naturally gasoline cars, that is not true. Number one. What was your second question?
That was the second question, actually.
What was your first question?
Right, the first question was, once again, do you think people who want to buy cars are going to buy a cycle instead? Because if I want to buy a car, then naturally I will go for the EV option if I have that in mind. Otherwise, I will never go for a cycle, which is why I challenge the very premise that people are going to go for a cycle in the first place.
But if you want to save the environment, you were very passionate about saving the environment. If you want to save the environment, only means of doing it is active transport. If you look at per capita car ownership of Germany, if in India we buy the hype, we buy the propaganda of electric vehicles and reach similar levels of per capita car consumption in India as is happening in Germany, the carbon footprint would go over the roof. It would be disastrous for a country like India. So yes, there are people who buy cycles. I am one of them. I cycle to work almost every day, and my teammate is also one of them. And yes, that's it. Thank you. Okay, so my next question is that why were you not talking about the present? Okay, you were always projecting into the future. And you were also talking about, so the question is, if you talk about the future, you said electric vehicles have great potential and that is the future. But if we talk about future and if we really take a decision which is focused on future, why not focus on more cleaner means of transport, like compressed air, biomass, levitation, you name it. All of that, the resources towards development of all of this has been eaten up by electric vehicles. So eventually it has led to a obstruction of these technologies. Any one of you three can answer this.
So firstly, we already talked about why we are talking about the future, because we think it is unfair to compare EV, an industry that has been growing for maybe a decade, to an industry like petroleum cars that has been growing for a century, right? You wouldn't compare a child to a college student. They all both have their own potentials. When you compare their own potential, when you compare a child's potential, you compare them, if you want to compare them to a college student, you would compare what a child is likely to be in the future. So similarly, we talked about how the EV industry is likely to be in the future when it is as advanced, when it has got as much time as the petroleum industry. And coming to your second question, when you talk about other alternatives, we do agree there were other alternatives, but the alternatives were never proven to be feasible, and we already have something like an EV industry that has been here for 10 decades, for a decade, and it has been to the power of other petroleum vehicles. So why not invest in EV vehicles? Why go for chase other dreams when you have a dream and you need to act on it now when the situation is so dire? That answers the question.
Okay, so just a couple more comments. Firstly, we have already given analysis as to why EVs are not as polluting as other alternatives, and we've given you reason to believe why the other alternatives that we mentioned will necessarily be those alternatives. For instance, the example that was brought about 100 kilowatt of power being used in EVs, note that that power is used, but there is no production of noxious fumes such as nitrogen oxides or anything else that pollutes the environment, whereas in the context of gasoline cars, we are burning fuels which are going to lead to this kind of pollution that is unaccounted for. Secondly, the other alternatives that you mentioned, such as biomass or whatever, we have no way of knowing whether these would have worked as well. Maybe if we had used biomass, we would be blaming why are we not trying out EV or anything of this sort. So which is why we don't have any way of knowing whether those other alternatives could have worked. So just saying that we could not explore those others because we invested in EV is not a valid argument.
one will I-
Yeah, please ask your questions.
they are supposed to ask, no?
Guys, you need to speed up, please.
Yeah. So my question is with Professor Uday. So you mentioned that policies need to be implemented for pollution check and all, but do you believe that there can be a policy about zero emission in a gasoline world, like something like if we are having a world in which gasoline cars are being used more and more, can we have a policy about zero emission, because that is something not possible in your paradigm?
Additionally, we are also talking about prevention versus cure, right? So note that whatever you are talking about is mitigatory, as in the number of gasoline cars out in the world is not going down, meaning we are still using petroleum, meaning we still have an energy crisis. On the other hand, if we use EV, then that is effectively replacing these gasoline cars, which is overall bringing down pollution levels over time permanently. Please.
I am very glad and humble to participate in this debate in an engineering institute where I firmly believe that technology is going to give a very concrete solution to the climate change. So possibly tomorrow we may have a technology which may give us a direction or may give a direction to the policymakers for zero emission. What we are debating is what is the scenario as on date. As on date scenario doesn't happen to be really great in favor of electric vehicle, because of the very fact that when you are promoting electric vehicle, what you are doing is that you are addressing problem at one location at the cost of the location of the source of generation. So I am not doubting that tomorrow we may not have. Technology has that potential. But then what is happening now is that unfortunately it is all about innovation being projected in the name of greener planet, but the target is the industry, promote the industry. So it is like based on the model of trial and error. And when you talk about carbon footprint, can we take a risk? Is it not a very exorbitant premium without assessing the risk? Okay, the question relates to what just I responded also, that when you focus on electric vehicle, with what certainty we are really projecting that electric vehicle is going to address the issue of carbon footprint? Because is it like well tested that this is the only technology available? And second, the source of energy which is going to make this EV running, that is again, when you talk about India or a large part of the world, that is again going to come from, fossil fuel. So at the end of the day, what you are advocating is that let us not look at our problem, let the problem get shifted to other location.
So, sir, I'll have like points of arguments for this question. The first one being is that all the problems that were being proposed to us, even though we are addressing that problem in our paradigm, what is happening, that production pollution which exists in today's world, even if we calculate that carbon footprint, even after adding so, we are equivalent to the carbon footprint that happens in their paradigm. Plus, now when the car goes on the road, that is where the next level of pollution happens, which is completely unaccounted on their side of the world. Like cars, you see old cars giving out so much smoke that they cause a lot of pollution, and EVs on the other hand with zero emission. So that is what needs to be focused. Second of all, like the question that they proposed, why do we believe that this is something good? Firstly, it is an industry that has just started. Still, it is able to be at par with the industry that is being existing from 150 years. So we, as a student of Indian Institute of Technology, if we don't see the prospect of technology, I don't think anyone else would be able to.
Yeah, the last question from this round, from the students team to the faculty team.
So the problems that we talked about how gasoline is getting more and more expensive and difficult and polluting to extract, was never addressed by your side. So one, I'd like you to address that. Secondly, let's talk about cost itself. Don't you think as gasoline keeps getting more expensive and EVs become comparatively more economical due to the production and research that is going into it, that they will become a more viable option in and of itself, which was what we talked about in our second speech, which means that naturally EVs will replace these vehicles, and as we have already proven, they will pollute the world less.
Question.
Okay, so two questions. Firstly, do you think gasoline is permanently viable because it is simply getting depleted? And secondly, don't you think as gasoline gets costlier, EV will naturally become the next thing?
Okay, please.
Just make initial response, then I'll give it to my colleague. We really don't want to get trapped in your propaganda where we are here to promote EVs. So because the debate is not on gasoline versus EV, so we will avoid getting into that propaganda. Now over to Prasad.
So the first question was, is gasoline sustainable or long-term viable? No, gasoline is not long-term viable, but neither is EV. EV is also not viable. After some time, I want to remind you of, what was happening in the early 1900s. In the early 1900s, where people used to use horse carts to go from a place to place B. So the streets of New York at the time were infested with horse dung. There was foul smell everywhere. And to solve this problem, gasoline cars were invented. And at that time, the people were so happy. Now, the streets no longer have horse dung. And 10 years later, they found that now the problem is emission. And that problem kept on increasing. Now, similarly, history is repeating itself. And let me tell my opponent team, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So now, the problem was, the gasoline vehicles are giving so much pollution. So let me find some other solution to this problem, without thinking what new problems can come due to this new solution. So yes, that is the answer to your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of round 2. We could cover 6 questions, but I think they were all pretty in-depth questions. Yeah, some had more emotion than facts, and some were very based on facts and figures. So it's okay, as is expected in any debate. We come to round 3 now, which is the judges' Q&A round. We have 3 of the judges. Let me introduce them once more for people who came later. Professor Deepa Dubey is Professor and Dean of the Rajiv Gandhi School of Intellectual Property Law. Professor M. Ramgopal, Professor of Mechanical Engineering, and presently the Dean of Faculty of Engineering and Architecture. And Mr. Samad Singh, the student of Mechanical Engineering and currently the Vice President, Technology Students, Gymkhana. So, okay. All right, so I'll now give it to the judges now to please ask their questions. They can direct it to any team, and then the team members, you can respond to their questions.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting debate. I think, in my personal opinion, we are trying to address the current problem, not the future this thing. My question to students, the opposition, they have been telling about 2 things related to EV. One is the problems with battery. The other one is the problems related to the generation of power which will drive these batteries, right? So you need to really look at these 2 issues and say whether the overall the CO2 footprint will reduce by considering both these aspects or not. I think you did not probably have figures with you, which the other team had. Okay, so I wish you had done some groundwork. Okay, in terms of comparison, right? That would have helped your cause, right? Do you think that, my question to you is, EV gives a permanent solution? Does it offer a permanent solution to transportation problems?
So firstly, I'd like to respond to what you said about firstly battery and secondly generation of power. I believe we have covered that in our speeches, but I'll still reiterate, right? So we do accept that what they are saying is right, that these things do pose a problem. However, 2 points of response. Firstly, on the question of battery, note that the battery in itself is reusable. There are possibility of recycling it in the future. But even if that were not to be the case, note that the battery production or whatever, that does cause pollution. But our main point is the fact that during the utilization of this car, the 10 or 15 years that it will run for, it will not generate any pollution during that time. Whereas the fuel-driven cars will necessarily produce carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and so on and so forth, as we have covered in our speech. Secondly, about generation of power. Once again, this is something similar. Sure, generation of power is going to generate fossil fuels, but that is not as bad as generating fossil fuels and then burning it up for the very purpose of driving the car itself. Finally, talking about whether or not EVs will provide a permanent solution, there is no such thing as like a permanent solution insofar as it will always exist, because at the time of first discovering petroleum, that too seemed to be a permanent solution. So eventually we will have to replace EVs as well. That is a fact. We always have to replace new technologies. But the idea is EVs are far more sustainable than petroleum. They provide a comparatively more permanent solution. They are more eco-friendly, as we have already established. And because we focus on the future, because we claim that given a chance to grow, PV is already at par with gasoline vehicles, it will only get better and better to the point where it can properly curb the problem of carbon footprint. That's our answer.
Good.
So adding to it, not all energy is made by fossil fuels and petroleum, right? So even if the energy generation uses some fossil fuel and petroleum, all countries, including India, are trying to shift to newer, cleaner sources of energy like solar, wind, even nuclear. So that, I believe, that is the comparative we are looking for when we see the emissions from an petroleum vehicle versus an emissions due to energy generation of an electric vehicle.
Okay, very good.
So just one thing I would like to add, one bit of information. In 2010, boarding a Chinese city, it was labeled the greenest city in the world. It became a hub for renewable energy equipment manufacturing companies. It sold, only in 1 year it sold 500 megawatts of solar products and 5,089 megawatts of wind power products. And in February 2015, it got the unwanted title of having the worst air quality in China. The country where air quality reportedly contributes to 1.2 million deaths each year. And the reason for this pollution was coal-fired steam boiler systems.
Okay, so it was fascinating to listen to all of your views, and it was great on the part of both the teams. So I think the question might be just a repetition. You spoke of EV as a concept, but here you have moved beyond, and when it is actually being one of the workable solutions that you are trying to look for. So are you trying to suggest that only when enough research goes into it, that it will be something which is something viable, not in its present form, in which form it continues to be a myth? Is it something that you are propagating?
So, ma'am, it is already on par with the gasoline vehicles, as it is already being analyzed, and that is why we are proposing it, that this concept should be more and more researched and more advanced, because a concept that has just come in like 10 and 15 years is helping us to to replace something which has been existing which has been existing for such a long time. Yes, we believe that it was helpful, like as sir proposed that that earlier, why gasoline vehicles were developed was because to replace those horses and all, and like in the same way we also believe that in today's world these gasoline vehicles are a problem which needs to be replaced, and which needs to be replaced because of the pollution that it is causing, and the kind of damage that is going on, and the level of decrement in fossil fuels. And on the other hand, we have a solution that is more viable, that is more sustainable, and which can help us in a longer run. We are not saying as the second speaker just now answered a question, that we are.
So if I just can interject, it's more of a projection rather than with facts and figures, as sir said that, you know, in terms of figures, etc., somewhere maybe we did not find enough data. So is that a mere projection, or is it backed by enough data to establish that in the present times?
Ma'am, so basically the idea is all of the examples that were brought out by side proposition were contingent on what happens during the productions of the vehicle themselves, right? What they do not take into account is the fact that after this car is being purchased, it will run on the streets for a period of time. Now, the comparative, as we have already established, is a gasoline car. That gasoline car, for as long as it runs with a low mileage and everything else that we have already analyzed, is actively contributing to pollution. Whereas on our side, we have a car which is powered by electricity itself, which does not produce greenhouse gases, which does not produce noxious fumes such as nitrogen oxide and so on and so forth, which does not harm the planet overall, which is why I believe already EVs provide a very viable solution. The only problems that we identified are one, cost, and secondly, the efficiency of generation overall. Even in the absence of these cars are already competent. But what we said is in the future, these problems will be actively improved upon, and which is why EVs are the natural successor to gasoline cars. So no, we do not rely on any projection. We are already better off. All we say is that if given a chance, EVs will be what saves the world from rising carbon footprints and so on and so forth. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much. And one question maybe for Team A. United Nations, and over the period there has been a whole lot of conventions and lot of international concerns which have been shown with regard to carbon emissions, the greenhouse effect, so on and so forth. And therefore all nation states for that purpose are putting their efforts to come up with the best possible solution at a point of time. So with while you do not, we all agree that you do not have a permanent solution at any point, at the given point of time that we are, compared to the other things available, do you agree that this is one which holds some promise?
Well, to this, I would just like to mention that we are not against EVs. The only thing is, we do not, from facts and figures, there is nothing to prove that EVs reduce footprint. So therefore, our take is definitely technology advances. That's why from the horse carts, we went to the gasoline cars, and then again we went to the electric cars. So there is no doubt about it, but definitely if you want a solution, the solution will be either you should opt for more of walking or cycling when it is possible. It has already been established that if for short distances, cycling or walking, it reduces carbon footprint by 75 to 80%. For example, from the institute, from our campus residences to our institutes. For moderate distances, it has also been shown that a train reduces carbon emissions again by about 70% compared to a car. Whether it's an electric car or a gasoline car, it's all the same. And for longer distances, again, instead of a flight, if you take a train, say from Kolkata to Delhi, then in that case, it again reduces carbon footprint for by again around say 70-75%. And regarding flights, international flights have less carbon footprint as compared to your local flights. The primary reason being that the main carbon footprint, it comes from takeoff and landing. So therefore, definitely there are solutions by planning of cities and then modifying our ways of looking, modifying or channeling our resources to certain more important things. See, in the quest of investing on EVs, we are not looking at much more socially relevant problems like healthcare, libraries, schools, etc. So therefore, definitely EVs are fine, but EVs do not reduce carbon footprint.
I'd like to add one more point to it. You said, what is the way of reducing the carbon footprint? One of the ways could be to, go for more carbon neutral modes of public transport. Now, a recent survey has come out that the UK will be fully electric, their entire railway system will be fully electric and carbon neutral by the year 2050. So this is a delay from the earlier projections. And the reason for the delay is that due to electric vehicles, the electricity demand has increased. And because the electricity demand has been bypassed towards the EV, the carbon neutrality and the electrification of the public transport, that has got delayed. So due to electric vehicles, other modes of transport or other means of reducing carbon footprint, they've also taken a hit. I'm giving you a very specific example. Thank you.
before I pass on to Samarth, I have just a small question for Team A. Don't you think that instead of having millions of polluting elements, you concentrate them and handle them centrally, right? I mean, it is granted that when you are switching to EVs, let us say that you are still producing power using coal-based power plants, right? But it is far more easier to control the pollutions in a power plant rather than millions of cars, right? I mean, do you think that way, even though the overall CO2 carbon footprint may reduce or may not reduce, but at least you are making the cities clean, okay, and shifting the pollution to a central place where probably you can handle it much better.
Sir, you want to answer? Or I should take it? Sir, the problem is that if you want to centralize everything, the problem is that the people in the cities, they enjoy the car rides, they enjoy a better lifestyle, but where the coal plant is, there people will suffer and they are not even bearing the fruits of, So somebody else is enjoying the fruits of carbon footprint, but somebody else is paying the price. That problems, in fact, that is one of the more precise problems of EV.
This problem has become much more rampant by the introduction of the electric vehicles. Just because of this, lithium mining, cobalt mining, all these things have increased, and they take place in an extremely water deficit area. So therefore, not only carbon footprint, there are several other concerns, and these are being mined in places where actually environmental regulations, etc., are not very stringent. You must have heard about graphite rain in China. So therefore, such things are increasing with the advent of EV for two reasons. One is battery production, and more important and the entirely gray area is recycling part. This recycling part, nobody is touching it because it is so very sensitive. And now since EVs are new, so therefore the recycling problem has not come. It is going to come in the next 10 to 15 years. And this problem is really going to be a very important problem. All the modern technologies of recycling or reuse which are being there, all of these, they greatly increase carbon footprint, not only by burning fossil fuels, but also by emitting extremely noxious gases like hydrogen fluorides and polymer melts, polymer burnouts. So this was one thing I wanted to tell against my opponent team.
Okay, so first of all, thank you everyone. So I'd like to add 2 points to the discussion. Firstly, we have automatically assumed that vehicles mean automobiles and cars. So I'd like you all to put up your points on considering we are taking a public transport, railway, airways, and various other modes of transport that may include two-wheelers, because all have a different range of pollution produced per vehicle and per capacity of each vehicle. So that might bring in a new factor to the discussion. And secondly, we are assuming that all the electric vehicles, and here we are discussing on the both sides, that they have a battery pack. So let's assume that we have also developed a new technology of conducting electricity through roadways or the railways or itself. So having constant conducive track available. So on these 2 additional points, I would like to take your inputs for both teams.
So I think,
yeah.
You can start.
So I think both of the points that you raised actually help our case, because these are simply future innovations which we can have, which is going to further boost the EV industry, right? Additionally, like just as a concluding remark, I would like to say whatever examples have been cited have been singular and specific as admitted by the other side themselves. But our core argument still stands, which is the fact that after these cars have been deployed, a gasoline car is going to run for, let's say, 15 years, and EV car will run for 15 years. On net, the pollution caused by the EV car is going to be far, far lesser. And finally, like whatever other problems were brought up, like other kinds of pollution due to EV vehicles, I think the pollution caused due to petroleum extraction is probably far, far greater because you directly burn fuel and whatnot. So yeah, I think that's it for us. Thank you.
Okay, so last point which I would make is that if electric vehicle has got such a promising effect on transforming our life in terms of reducing carbon footprint, then why the whole policy prescription is based on a compulsive culture of giving incentives for the customer who is buying electric vehicles? In the state of West Bengal, the subsidy which the government gives is 10,000 rupees per kilowatt vehicle, that's what, and road tax exemption is there entirely, 0% road tax one has to pay. If EV is better option, let it be culturally adopted, and let it not be become an alternate through a kind of environment where you are getting incentivized for committing something which you are not very sure. Thank you.
I'd like to add one more point to team here. So as the analogy that you have mentioned out, this is why government is giving out incentives to make us adopt to something. So just defend this part. Why was there incentive for us to adopt to solar panel where it was proven that solar panels are the better source of generating energy? Because the point you made does not connect directly.
One has to do with society, the other has to do with individual. That's what is the big difference.
Okay, that brings us to the end of round 3, and therefore the closure of the competitive rounds of the debate. So we will now give some time to our judges for coming up with the judgment, but we are not going to let them go free. So audience, now the spotlight is on you. For the next 10 minutes or so, you have the opportunity to ask questions to either of the teams or any of the members. Please come over. Yep. I knew.
Okay, I raise my 2 hands because I have one question for you, one question for you. Now the point is, I somehow happen to be the member of the Government of India committee which is working on EVs. So I know the details. On the other side, I'll come to you because I am in this committee because I work on LCAs. So your whole points were based on LCA. I'll come to it in a minute. My whole thing is, we are also moving towards an era where we want to make everything in India and become independent. If you are saying that EVs are the way forward, and if you look into the cost analysis, 45% of an e-vehicle comes from the battery, be it be lithium, be it be sodium, be it be anything else. Who will make that battery, and for after how many decades are you looking into India becoming independent in that area?
Sir, we do agree that India needs to become independent in terms of importing stuff, but we want to assert that the Indian public, especially the poor people, first need to breathe clean air, they first need to have access to clean water, then India can think about having their own assets, only importing what they should.
Okay, my lab is very near. Come to my lab, we'll discuss more on this point. Coming back to you, the faculty colleagues, you said that the life cycle assessment studies says that EVs are very repulsive to us because we take electricity from grid. Just to give you data, the data says Government of India has forced solar cell and wind based energies to go up to 100 gigawatts by 2030. And if you use this electricity, your LC analysis tells you that per kg equivalent of carbon dioxide comes down to nearly 6% compared to 96% if you use fossil fuel. So we are going to use electricity which is renewable, has much lower carbon footprint, and if I use an electricity which is having a very low carbon footprint, what's wrong in giving it to the EV vehicles which are also having a very low carbon footprint?
My first response is that the current LCA all over the world, they do not include the recycle part. They just include the battery manufacture and on-road emissions. The second thing is very true that you can always use your clean energies to do it, but considering the intermittent nature of clean energy, you need a good amount of backup supply. So that backup supply invariably comes from your fossil fuel or rather the batteries which have been either made or whatever it is from fossil fuels. The second thing is, considering the same thing, the next thing is just that I had given the reference of the city of Boding, that even if you are using cleaner energies, the equipments to produce those cleaner energies are, for those manufacture of those equipment also, we add to the carbon footprint. So
thank you, Professor Das.
Amrish.
Just-
We are
just
only going to light the fire, you can
question.
douse it outside.
No question. Thank you very much for the answer. I'll come to and get some more data from you. Thank you. I must say thank you, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, next question from the audience. Yes, please, come forward. Or somebody can take the microphone to her. Okay, others have started lining up. Okay. We have to stop as soon as the judges are ready. Okay, go ahead, please.
So my question is to the team of professors. While we know the problem of depletion of resources and petroleum or coal or whatever the other kind of non-renewable resources are coming down, has been coming from like a long time, right? And the idea of electric vehicles was not sudden. It's come for a long time. Then why do you think the other means, the other types that you stated, like biomass or compressed air, why do you think that was not taken up but electric vehicles was taken up?
I think it's a case of sunk costs. Businesses work on the concept of sunk costs. They already invested a certain amount of money into promoting EVs. There is a video, you please go to YouTube after this event. In the year 1920, there is Elon Musk actually crying on stage when he says that when he was doing the calculations for electric vehicles, he had not accounted for batteries. But since he had already invested so much into developing the assembly plants of Tesla, he then goes forward with it. So EVs are being promoted because of the sunk costs and the investments that already various businesses have put in. And businesses know only one thing, that is the bottom line. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Am I audible, right?
Yes, you are.
So I agree that the ultimate goal has to be people being active and they have to walk for less distances, like people who cycle for 2 kilometers. But don't you think that for long distance traveling, people will still need that? And even if people have to walk, right? When we came to KGP, we still had to think that I had to go to my Nalanda 3 kilometers, I still need to use my cycle as well. So we have to change the mindset as well. So how do you think it will work? And if we erase this factor, then comparatively, which is more recyclable. So EVs are using solar panels or they are using wind or other renewable sources. And fossil fuels are still digged from mines and they are still very harmful to our environment. So what is your viewpoint on that?
Okay, so how to promote cycle? To incentivize it. As of last year, I think, I don't know the exact number, but the government of India spent something like 60,000 crore rupees towards incentivizing electric vehicles. So if instead of 60,000 crores being spent to incentivize electric vehicles, if they would spend 600 crores trying to incentivize cycle, a large proportion of India would be starting to take cycle. So it is just, the political willpower, the resources, everything is limited. It is about how we use it to bring meaningful change.
One last question, the judges are ready. Anybody? Okay.
Thank you for the question. So recently, the development of room temperature superconductors.
Who is the question directed to? Which team?
Basically, Team A.
Yeah, right. Students have got a chance today to reverse the tables. Okay, go ahead, please.
Sorry. So with the development of room temperature superconductors, which can also help, which are also applicable in ultra efficient electricity grids, ultra fast and energy efficient computer chips, etc. Don't you think that they'll be more easily incorporated in in electric vehicles than in gasoline cars, thus propelling electric vehicles into the future faster?
So I will start, so since this is the last question, allow me to end this on a slightly lighter note. You said in the long run, something like superconductors will help. In the long run, all of us will die. So, okay.
Sorry, but it's already been developed. Room temperature superconductors have already
Yes.
been developed and they can be incorporated into the
Yeah,
electric vehicles.
in the long run, they can be developed. In the long run, all of us will die. That is exactly the definition of myth, as Professor Uday Shankar has he started his speech, that this is how myths are developed in the first place.
I'm sorry, sir, but that's not going to be in the long run.
But how do you intend to use room temperature superconductors for automobiles?
So basically they can increase efficiency and also they might reduce the battery size because, for example, graphene-based batteries which are more efficient than lead-based batteries. Sorry?
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Flywheels. Flywheels, okay. Okay, possible. Good point. We'll look forward to that analysis.
We can write a research proposal about it someday.
you give your professor a proposal idea. So if he gets it funded, you should ask for something. Okay. I understand the judges are ready with their judgment. So I would, without further ado, and we are also almost approaching 5 o'clock. So I would request the judges to please come on stage and announce the results. Professor Ram Gopal, Professor Dubey, and Samarth. Okay, all right. No. I am ready to announce, but you will have to give out the prizes. Okay, the judges need a little more time to complete their calculations. Huh? What? You want to ask a question? Okay.
I'm audible, yeah. So, sir, my question is for Professor Uday Shankar. So, sir, your speech was premised on the fact that government hasn't rolled out any such policies which would phase out coal. Like, that was clearly the point. So, but I don't think that's true. Government clearly has laid out like FAME 1, 2, 3 subsidy plans with a huge budget of like 52 billion rupees, as far as I know. So, given that government is investing so much money in this particular technology, why do you still think that we can replace it with any other clean energy or any other source? Like, isn't this a clear signaling that there is a huge scope in this particular industry? Otherwise, why will government have to incentivize with such huge budget? That's it.
All of us are aware about the famous theory what Adam Smith has given, no? Invisible hand. With that invisible hand also comes invisible elbow. This incentivization is nothing but that invisible elbow, which in a longer term goes deeper into our pocket without having any kind of concrete outcome. And that's why you keep on experiencing government changing the goalpost. So today you have incentivization policy for electric vehicle. Tomorrow we should not get surprised if the same comes for a hydrogen cell. And third day it may come from the proposition which had come from our young friend, where he had given a good idea to Professor Atul. So that's how the incentivization keeps on, evolving in the terms of policy making by the government.
Okay, we're still waiting. So looks like yeah. So Professor Ram Gopal will be announcing the results, and I would also please request the other two judges to come on stage.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, it's a very, very close fight. So, but the difference is very small. But faculty team takes the lead. They have actually, the difference is 353 versus 345. So the difference is only 8, right? So we would like to congratulate both the teams. Okay.
So the faculty team is the winner. I would request the team members to please come forward and the judges to hand over the prizes. उधर प्राइस আছে তো না অন্যদের আছে Okay, but then as we say, everybody is the winner. So please, I would request the prizes for the students team as well, and the judges to kindly hand over the runners-up prizes to the students team.
And all the speakers spoke very well, but we have to choose one person. So if it is that, then it is Professor Atul Jain. Thank you and congratulations.
Okay, now it's my pleasure to give our small token of appreciation to the three judges for the time that they spent and for coming up with this, with the judgment for this very keenly contested debate. So, please.
I'd also like to request the judges to present a memento to our moderator as a token of appreciation.
And thank you, sir, for choosing such a wonderful topic. Like, this debate has been very wonderful, and your time that you have put in for helping us choose a topic itself.
Okay, so that kind of concludes the debate on our Foundation Day 2023. Thank you all for coming. And I think, once again, congratulations to all the debaters, and our special thanks to the judges. Thank you, and see you next year.
Audience? Audience? The laser show is organized at the main building, Bidhan Chowk, starting from 7:30 p.m. And the cultural program will take place at the Kalidas Auditorium starting from 5:45 p.m. Yes.
Okay, so thank you guys for being here. So you can head over to Kalidas, this person line, and see you at 5:45 over there. And so just you know what the lineup is, we have 2 solo performances and 1 ETMS performance. So they'll be playing a music, and in the end I'll have something special.